The alarms first came as a whisper, not the kind of noise that panic people, but the low hum of systems detecting something far beyond Earth's orbit. I was in the command deck of Fort Armstrong, the military outpost carved into the gray dust of the moon. My name doesn't matter much. History won't remember men like me. It will remember what we did. The screen glowed with red markers, more of them appearing with every second. At first, the analysts thought it was a glitch. A swarm of dots like that didn't happen, not in our corner of the galaxy. But then the numbers settled, and every eye in that deck went dead quiet. An Imperial fleet. Hundreds of ships, their signature. Screamed alien engineering, massive carriers, armored dreadnoughts, and wave after wave of escort craft. They had the arrogance to march right into our system. As if they owned it. The room felt colder. I could see the reflection of men's faces against the glass, pale, rigid, jaws clenched. Most of us had heard the stories, empires stretching across the stars, stripping worlds, turning entire species into slaves or dust. We always wondered when it would be our turn. Well, now we had our answer. The order came fast. Prepare. Earth's defense grid. Cities fell silent. Families were ordered underground. Every weapon we had ever built, every black project that had been hidden for decades was being powered on at once. Humanity had been preparing, whether we admitted it out loud or not. The Empire sent a broadcast before they crossed Jupiter's orbit. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't even a negotiation, just a cold message translated into our tongue by their machines. Earth is claimed by the Imperial throne. You will surrender your weapons, your resources, and your people. Resistance will mean extinction. I remember the silence after it played across the deck. Not one of us spoke because deep down we knew they weren't bluffing. This wasn't a raid, this was annihilation. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was that Earth wasn't the primitive backwater they thought it was. By the time they crossed Mars, our fleets were waiting. The Aegis class destroyers rose from orbit like blades drawn in anger, massive orbital cannons disguised for decades as communication arrays pivoted toward the void, and below the hidden black projects, the kind even most governments never admitted existed, were being moved into firing position. When the Empire's vanguard broke formation and advanced, I braced myself for the usual chaos of war. Long-range exchanges, brutal attrition, slow grinding battles. But what happened wasn't a battle, it was slaughter. The first wave of human weapons fired in silence, no dramatic flashes, no cinematic flair, just instant blinding destruction. Their lead ships vanished in bursts of white light, crumpled like paper crushed in a fist, not damaged, not crippled, gone. 1 second the Empire had a fleet, the next they had debris. I'll never forget the look on Commander Holt's face. He was a hard man, the kind who didn't flinch when men screamed or burned. But when he saw the feed, alien ships exploding faster than the sensors could track, his lips parted just slightly, as if he couldn't believe his own eyes. The Empire had come with arrogance. They thought they were bringing fire to cavemen. Instead, they were erased before they understood the rules of the fight. Seconds, that's all it took. From Earth's surface, billions of eyes watched live as the invincible armada of the galaxy's greatest conquerors became nothing but sparks in the void. Children cheered, old men wept. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't the hunted, we were the hunters. But here's the truth nobody likes to admit. Victory that fast doesn't feel clean. It doesn't feel heroic. It feels like something darker, like we'd unleashed a monster that had been waiting inside us all along, because as the wreckage floated in silence, every man in that command deck knew the same thing. If we could do that to them in seconds, then what was stopping us from doing it to anyone? And that's when the war truly began. The wreckage drifted in silence. Pieces of ships that once carried tens of thousands of Imperial soldiers now floated like burning shrapnel across the black canvas of space. I stood at the glass of the command deck, helmet tucked under my arm, watching sparks flicker in the void like dying stars. No cheers rose in the room. The men were too stunned to make a sound. They had expected a battle, maybe even a desperate fight that left Earth bloodied but still breathing. What they got instead was a massacre so one-sided it felt unnatural. The silence broke when Commander Holt's voice echoed across the deck. "Confirm it," he barked. His tone was rough, but beneath it I heard the disbelief. "Confirmed," one of the analysts whispered, almost as if saying it too loudly would undo the miracle. "The Imperial fleet, it's gone." The words sank into me like a weight. Gone, an entire armada, hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of lives erased. In seconds, I should have felt relief, maybe even pride. Instead, my gut twisted. War wasn't supposed to be this clean. By the time we sent the all-clear to Earth, the planet was already in chaos. News feeds lit up with words like victory, impossible, divine retribution. Anchors wept, live on air, clutching microphones with trembling hands. Children ran into the streets, waving banners they didn't even understand. Every nation declared it as proof of their own foresight, claiming their leaders had known Earth was destined to rise. But I saw it differently. When I looked at the debris field, I didn't see destiny. I saw fear, not ours, theirs, somewhere out there. Across the stars, the Empire had eyes on this fleet. They were waiting for a report that would never come. And when silence answered back, what would they think? They had sent their armada to wipe out an upstart world the same way they'd done to a dozen others. Instead, their fleet had been butchered before they could fire a single shot. No empire takes that kind of humiliation quietly. We were debriefed for hours. Every officer, every technician, every soldier, the higher-ups wanted every detail. How fast the weapons fired, what resistance the ships offered, how the debris scattered, even the heat signatures left in the wreck. They called it intelligence gathering. To me, it felt like men grasping at the edges of something they didn't fully understand. Because here's the truth, most of us had no idea what we just used. Oh, we'd trained, sure, we'd been briefed on defensive technologies, but the reality of what those weapons did, no training prepared us for that. They weren't missiles, they weren't lasers, they were something older, something buried so deep in the black projects that even our commanders spoke about them like myths. Directed singularity bursts. The tech officers called them quantum shear fields, words that sounded more like dark magic than science. All I knew was this: the Empire had underestimated us, and the price they paid wasn't just defeat, it was humiliation, and humiliation breeds rage. The weeks that followed felt stranger Then the battle itself, on Earth. Nations united in a way I had never seen. Before, the usual divisions, political, religious, cultural, blurred into nothing. Every man and woman walked with their chest higher, their voice louder. For once, humanity wasn't the underdog. We were the apex predators, and the galaxy had just learned it the hard way. But unity built on blood is fragile. Some people wanted revenge. They said we should strike first before the Empire gathered its strength. Others preached restraint, warning that our miracle weapons might not save us twice. Street rallies turned violent. I watched footage of civilians chanting for war, their fists pumping, their eyes burning with the kind of zeal I usually saw in soldiers. It unsettled me. The more I saw, the more it felt like Earth had become drunk on its own power. And then the broadcasts came, not from Earth, from out there. The first transmission broke every frequency at once, hijacking satellites and scrambling feeds. The voice was alien, sharp and mechanical, but the words came through clear in our language. You are not prey. You are not livestock. You are a threat. The message repeated across every channel over and over for hours. Then it stopped. A week later, another transmission arrived. This time it wasn't just words, it was an image, a burning city under alien skies, craters filled with ash and bone. A warning: the Empire was making an example out of someone else. They couldn't touch Earth yet, but they could crush others to prove they still held dominion. Worlds we hadn't even heard of were being erased just to send us a message: your victory changes nothing. But deep down, every man in uniform knew it had changed everything. I remember the first time I was sent back to Earth. After the battle, I walked through New York streets, the neon lights glowing against glass towers, crowds filling every corner. At first glance it looked like the same city I'd left, but the eyes were different. People didn't look at the sky with fear anymore. They looked at it with hunger. Billboards screamed with slogans: Earth first, humanity above all, the stars belong to us. Recruitment stations overflowed. Boys who once dreamed of college now dreamed of starships. It hit me then. This wasn't just defense anymore. We'd tasted blood. We'd seen what we could do, and now the galaxy wasn't big enough for restraint. Commander Holt put it best during a closed briefing. He stood at the head of the table, his voice steady, his eyes burning. Gentlemen, the Empire came to teach us fear. Instead, we've taught them terror. That means one thing: they will come back, and when they do, we won't just hold the line, we'll push it. Half the room cheered, the other half sat in silence. I was in the second half because I couldn't stop thinking about the faces we'd never see, the crews of those ships, the soldiers who never got the chance to understand why they were dying. Were they monsters? Maybe, but they were also men following orders just like us. War strips away the humanity of your enemy, but when you wipe out thousands in seconds, you have to ask yourself what's being stripped away from you. The galaxy's reaction came in waves. Some species celebrated us. We intercepted transmissions from systems far beyond Imperial control, smaller civilizations cheering in their native tongues, calling Earth their savior. To them, we weren't humans anymore. We were giants who had slain the unbeatable, but allies made in fear are fragile. They wanted us strong enough to fight for them, but not strong enough to rule them. Already I saw distrust growing in there. Words. Other civilizations hated us. Instantly, not because they loved the Empire, but because they saw the truth. If humans could erase a fleet in seconds, then we weren't just another species, we were a threat to everyone. And the Empire went silent. That was the most frightening part. No declarations of vengeance, no threats, no broadcasts. Just silence, which meant they were planning. And if the stories were true about their endless armies, their centuries of conquest, then silence was worse than any threat. Nights on Earth grew restless for me. I'd lie awake in my bunk staring at the ceiling, replaying those seconds over and over. Ships vanishing like smoke, men dying without even knowing why. I told myself they deserved it, that they'd come to burn our world. But part of me wondered, had we unleashed something we couldn't control? Once, after a late briefing, I found Hall alone in the observation chamber. He was staring at Earth, the blue glow shining across his scarred face. "You don't sleep either, do you?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "Do you know why they lost so fast?" I stayed quiet. "It's not just the weapons," he muttered. "It's that we were ready to use them. You think the Empire ever believed we'd fire something like that? No, they thought humans were too sentimental, too soft. They never understood what desperation does to a species." He turned and looked at me. "That's our strength, but it's also the thing that'll damn us." Then he walked out, leaving me with his words echoing in my head. Weeks stretched into months. Earth built fleets faster than I thought possible. Entire shipyards rising in orbit, churning out war machines painted with our flags. Call for soldiers never stopped. Men lined up in droves, desperate to be part of the great crusade to the stars. The propaganda painted it as destiny, humanity ascendant, but I saw it for what it was: fear dressed as pride. We knew the Empire would return, and every man wanted to believe he'd be ready when it happened. I kept telling myself I was fighting for Earth, for survival, but deep down I started to wonder, what if survival wasn't the goal anymore? What if conquest had already taken root in us? When I closed my eyes, I didn't see victory. I saw the wreckage, sparks in the void, drifting in silence. Ghosts of men who'd thought they were invincible, erased before they could even scream. And somewhere out in the dark, their brothers were coming, not to invade, to avenge. And I wasn't sure anymore if we were ready for the kind of war that was about to begin. The silence finally broke. It didn't come as a message this time. No grand announcement from the Empire declaring their intent. It came in the form of screams broadcasted across the void. The first signal we intercepted wasn't meant for us. It was a distress beacon from a colony in the Vega system, one of the far-off outposts that had long claimed independence from Earth's politics. We had ignored them for decades. Now their voices came through the speakers, frantic and choked with static. "They're here burning. God help us." Then nothing but static. The room on Fort Armstrong went cold. The analysts replayed it, trying to stabilize the signal, but the truth was clear. The Empire had returned, not to Earth, no, not yet. They were carving through the outer systems, punishing anyone who might dare take inspiration from our victory. It was a message written in blood. Look what happens when you resist. Commander Holt stood at the head of the room, his fists pressed to the table. They're not striking us directly. Because they're afraid, he said. Afraid of what we'll do to them, but they'll bleed the galaxy around us until we stand alone. And then came the words I'd been dreading. We can't wait for them to come. We take the fight to them. Weeks that followed blurred into a storm of preparation. Earth's orbit transformed into something monstrous. Shipyards burning with activity day and night, massive carriers floating like dark leviathans above the atmosphere. Swarms of destroyers circling like sharks. I was assigned to the Resolute, a warship so new the paint on its hull still smelled of chemicals. She was a predator, bristling with weaponry, her corridors lined with men whose eyes burned with equal parts pride and fear. The propaganda machine had already branded us heroes before we even launched. News feeds showed footage of our training spliced with dramatic music and headlines like Earth Strikes Back. Families wept at the sight of their sons and brothers marching into the ships, waving as though we were off to parade. Instead of a slaughterhouse, I didn't wave. I couldn't. Every night before lights out, I lay awake staring at the metal ceiling, wondering if the Empire was watching us right now, if they were laughing at how eager we were to fling ourselves into their fire. But Holt's words echoed in my skull. Desperation is our strength. So we launched. The void swallowed us. The Resolute's engines burned white as we left Earth behind, the blue orb shrinking into nothing. For many of the men, it was their first time leaving home. They stood at the observation deck, pressing hands to the glass, whispering silent promises to the world they might never see again. I didn't join them. I stayed at my post, running diagnostics, checking systems I already knew were fine, anything to keep from thinking about what waited for us ahead. The first engagement came near the Vega ruins. What had once been a thriving colony was now a graveyard. The planet's surface glowed with fresh scars. Entire cities melted into glass. Orbit was littered with wreckage, human, alien both, and waiting for us among the ruins were Imperial ships, not the massive fleet we'd erased near Earth. No, these were smaller detachments, scouting parties meant to mop up survivors and spread terror. But even their smaller craft dwarfed most of ours. Their design was elegant in its cruelty, black holes that seemed to drink in the starlight, weapons glowing with a sickly red pulse. For a moment, staring at them through the glass, I felt the old fear creep back. These were predators, hunters who had ruled the stars long before we dared crawl out of our atmosphere. And then the order came: engage. The first salvo erupted like thunder. Our cannons roared, and for a brief moment I thought we'd repeat Earth's miracle. Imperial ships lit up there, shields cracking under the fury of weapons they hadn't expected us to wield. Two of their escorts exploded, instantly torn apart by quantum shear fields. Cheers filled the deck. Men slammed fists against consoles, voices rising in triumph. But it didn't last, because this time the Empire fired back. The first blast hit the Resolute like a hammer. The ship shuddered, lights flickering, alarms wailing. I was thrown against the console. The breath ripped from my lungs. When I looked up, half the deck was already covered in smoke, sparks raining from the ceiling. Shields at 60%, someone shouted, "Return fire." Holt's voice boomed calm as iron. We fired again. Two more Imperial ships crumbled under our guns, but the rest pressed forward, relentless. Their weapons cut through our fleet like scythes through wheat. I watched as the Endeavor, a sister ship, took a direct hit. 1 second she was there, her cannons blazing. The next she was nothing but a cloud of molten debris. Men screamed, not out of fear but rage. Every loss only made them fight harder. Their hands flying across controls, their voices raw as they shouted coordinates and firing solutions. We weren't just defending ourselves anymore, we were out for blood. And somehow through the chaos we won. One by one the Imperial ships fell until the last of them exploded in silence. The battlefield went quiet, nothing but drifting wreckage and the heavy sound of men catching their breath. We'd survived. But it hadn't been seconds this time. It had been blood and fire, men dying by the hundreds. And I realized then Earth's miracle wasn't going to repeat itself. The Empire had learned. After the battle, Hall gathered us in the war room. His face was pale, lined with exhaustion, but his voice was steady. They bled us today, not enough to stop us, but enough to warn us. The Empire won't underestimate us again. He looked around the room, his gaze burning into each of us. That means one thing: from here on it only gets worse. His words rang true. In the weeks that followed, we pushed deeper into contested space. Each battle was bloodier than the last. Sometimes we won, sometimes we barely crawled away. With half our fleet intact, the Empire fought like a wounded beast, cornered, furious, desperate to remind the galaxy why they ruled. And all the while, Earth's people watched from their screens, cheering as if this were sport. They saw the victories, not the losses. They saw the headlines, not the screams of men burning alive in ruptured corridors. To them we were heroes. To me, we were dying slower than the others. One night after a brutal engagement near the Orion Belt, I found myself alone in the observation chamber. The stars stretched endless before me, but all I saw were ghosts, wreckage, fields, shattered ships, men drifting the void. Holt joined me, silent at first. He stood beside me, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the same stars. They won't stop, I said finally. My voice was hoarse. No matter how many we kill, they'll keep coming. They will. He agreed. Then he added, but so will we. I turned to him. At what cost? How many men do we bury before it ends? He met my gaze, his eyes hard as steel. All of them, if that's what it takes. You think the Empire would hesitate to burn Earth to ashes? No, they do it in a heartbeat, and if we want to survive, we have to be willing to do the same. His words chilled me, not because they were wrong, but because they were true. War wasn't about honor, it wasn't about pride, it was about survival, and survival demanded sacrifice. And deep down I knew what Hall was really saying. If humanity wanted to live, we'd have to become the very thing we were fighting. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my bunk listening to the ship groan around me, men snoring in exhaustion, and I thought about Earth, the people cheering us on, blind to the blood that bought their pride. I thought about the Empire, the silence before the storm, the cold rage that surely burned in their hearts, and I thought about myself, a soldier caught between survival and morality, staring into a void that offered no answers. The war wasn't just coming, it was here, and we were already losing pieces of ourselves with every battle we fought. Because no matter who won in the end, one truth became clearer with every passing day: humanity wasn't fighting to survive anymore, we were fighting to dominate, and I wasn't sure there would be anything left of us when the war was over. The war stopped feeling like battles and started feeling like storms. They came without warning, swallowing fleets in the dark, scattering ships like leaves in the wind. The Empire wasn't sending scouting detachments anymore. They were bringing their full weight to bear. We saw it first at Riel. The Resolute was part of the spearhead fleet, 100 of our best ships cutting into Imperial space, hunting their supply lines. We thought we were clever, thought we could starve the beast before it reached our throat. But when we dropped out of slip space near Riel, the beast was waiting for us. The sensors lit up red so fast the consoles nearly overloaded, thousands of contacts stretching across the void like a wall of fire, carriers larger than cities, dreadnoughts whose cannons glowed brighter than suns, endless lines of escorts in tight formation. It was more ships than humanity had ever fielded in its history gathered in one place. The Empire hadn't sent a fleet this time. They'd sent an armada. Panic swept through the deck. I heard men cursing, praying, whispering promises to gods they hadn't believed in for years. My own throat went dry as I stared at the tactical map. Our 100 ships looked like ants facing down a mountain. Commander Holt didn't flinch. "Signal Earth Command," he said, voice sharp. "We found the Empire's hammer." The comms officer hesitated. "Sir, they outnumber us 10 to 1. Then we make them bleed 10 for every one of ours." The fleet scattered into combat formation, engines roaring, shields rising. My fingers flew across the console, locking in coordinates, plotting, firing solutions. My body moved out of instinct, but my mind was screaming, "We can't win this." And then the void lit up. The first volley hit us like a tidal wave, beams of red carved through our fleet, tearing ships apart. In seconds, the Dauntless exploded in a burst of white fire. The ironclad split in two, her crew spilling into the void. Like sparks, we fired back every gun, screaming in defiance. Singularity bursts ripped through enemy escorts, tearing holes in their formations. Quantum shear field sliced carriers in half, leaving wreckage tumbling into Riel's light. But for everyone we killed, 10 more pushed forward. It wasn't a battle, it was slaughter. The Resolute shuddered under the barrage. Consoles sparked, alarms wailed, men screamed as bulkheads ruptured and smoke filled the air. I was thrown against the wall, blood running from a gash above my eye. "Shields at 20%, someone shouted. "Return fire," Holt roared. We fought like demons, every man on the deck screaming orders, hands flying across controls. The ship groaned as if it were alive, her cannons glowing white hot with rage. We took 3 Imperial destroyers with us in one salvo, but it wasn't enough. The Empire's armada pressed closer, relentless. Their dreadnoughts loomed like gods, their weapons tearing through us with precision born of centuries of conquest. And in that moment I understood something terrible. Earth's miracle at Sol had been just that, a miracle. Out here against the Empire's true strength, we were ants beneath a boot. The order came from Earth Command. Retreat, but retreat wasn't simple. Armada had boxed us in, cutting off slip space corridors, hemming us against Riel's burning light. Ships peeled off in desperation, engines screaming as they tried to break through the wall of fire. Most didn't make it. The Resolute's hull screamed as we punched forward, her engines burning hotter than they were ever meant to. Imperial ships closed in. On all sides cannons flashing. Brace. Hall shouted. The world went white when I opened my eyes. The deck was chaos. Smoke choked the air. Bodies lay sprawled across the floor. My ears rang. My chest burned. Half the consoles were dark, shattered by overloads. We're through, the helmsman shouted voice. Somehow, impossibly, the Resolute had punched through the blockade. Slip flared open before us, a swirling tunnel of light. Go, Holt roared. Engines screamed, the ship lurched, and then the stars stretched into infinity. As we vanished into slip space, we emerged days later, battered and broken, in a system far from Riel. The fleet that came with us was a shadow of what it had been. Of the 100 ships that had launched, fewer than 30 limped out alive. The war room was silent as Holt stared at the casualty reports. His face was stone, but his hands trembled just slightly enough for me to notice. They wanted us to see it, he said. Finally, his voice was low, grim. They wanted us to know what we're really up against. He looked around the room, his eyes meeting mine for a heartbeat. And now we do. The news hit Earth like a hammer. The propaganda machine tried to spin it as a strategic withdrawal, but the truth bled through. Families saw the casualty lists. Mothers saw their sons' names. Widows wept on live broadcasts. For the first time since the war began, I saw doubt in the eyes of the people. The pride, the hunger, the arrogance. It cracked under the weight of reality. The Empire wasn't some backwater bully we could swat away. They were a monster, older and stronger than anything we'd ever faced, and they were coming. Weeks after Riel were worse than the battle itself. The Empire moved like wildfire, their armadas sweeping across the galaxy, worlds burned by the dozen. Colonies that had once looked to Earth for hope now screamed in vain as they were erased from existence. We intercepted distress signals daily, each one a dagger in the gut, and Earth built faster. Shipyards churned night and day, men drafted in numbers that made my head spin. The propaganda roared louder, drowning out the whispers of fear. This is humanity's destiny. We will not kneel. But beneath the surface I saw it unraveling. Morale fractured. Some soldiers whispered that the war was unwinnable. Others whispered worse, that maybe we should negotiate surrender before Earth burned too. The higher-ups didn't tolerate whispers. Men who spoke too loudly vanished overnight. The message was clear. There would be no surrender. And part of me wondered if that was bravery or madness. The Resolute limped from battle to battle, patched up with scrap and willpower. We fought when ordered, killed when we could, retreated when we had to. Each engagement bled us further, each victory smaller than the last. But the strangest thing was this: the men didn't break. If anything, the worse the war got, the harder they fought. Maybe it was pride, maybe rage, maybe just the refusal to die quietly, but I saw it in their eyes every time the alarms blared. Fire that no defeat could smother. It scared me because I realized Hall had been right all along. Desperation was our strength, and desperation could make us monsters. One night after a particularly brutal skirmish near Sirius, I found myself alone again in the observation chamber. The stars stretched endless before me, cold and uncaring. I thought about the men we'd lost, the colonies burning, the Armada waiting somewhere in the dark, and I thought about Earth. Would she survive this Could she, or were we just delaying the inevitable, bleeding ourselves dry until the Empire crushed us once and for all? Hall's words echoed in my head, all of them. If that's what it takes, maybe. That was the answer. Maybe survival meant losing everything, our morals, our humanity, even our souls. And maybe, just maybe, when the smoke cleared, the galaxy wouldn't fear the Empire anymore. They'd fear us. The order came weeks later. Earth was done playing defense. The fleet wasn't going to hide, wasn't going to retreat. We were going to strike the Empire where it hurt, not at their armadas at their home. When the order came, the silence in the war room was deafening. No one spoke, not even Halt. The message from Earth Command played once, twice, a third time, same words each time, delivered in the cold, mechanical tone of authority that didn't care who bled. New directive: target Imperial core system. Civilian infrastructure is not to be spared. The Empire must learn fear. There it was, plain cold. We weren't fighting to survive anymore. We were fighting to make the galaxy bleed. The Resolute was patched together with scrap and spit. By then, she wasn't pretty, but she was hungry. The men aboard her, too. They had lost friends, brothers, entire fleets at Riel and Sirius. When the order came, I saw the fire in their eyes, the kind that doesn't question, only obeys me. I felt sick. I told myself from the start that we were defending Earth, that every trigger I pulled, every ship we destroyed was to keep my home safe. But now we were being told to burn their homes, to erase the same families we swore vengeance for when it was Earth under threat. Was that survival or vengeance? Hall didn't flinch. He gathered us all on the command deck and delivered the order as if it were law carved into stone. His voice never shook, not once. The Empire believes we are prey. He said they believe Earth is weak. That ends now. We will strike their heart, tear out their pride, and show them that humanity does not kneel. We do not beg. We take. The men roared in approval. Fists slammed against consoles. Voices rose in fury. I stayed silent. My throat felt tight. Our target was a system called Vera, deep inside Imperial territory. Not their capital, not their crown jewel, but close enough to sting. It was a supply hub, home to factories that fed their armadas, cities that built their war machines, and it was home to civilians, billions of them. We jumped into Vera's orbit at dawn, the planet's pale green glow filling the viewport. At first it was almost beautiful. Clouds curled across the atmosphere like soft brush strokes. Oceans gleamed under the starlight. For a moment I forgot it was the enemy's world. Then the guns warmed up. The first bombardment came from orbit. Our cannons opened fire, streaks of light tearing through the sky, slamming into cities below. Explosions bloomed across the surface like angry flowers. Whole blocks erased in seconds. Through the observation glass I saw plumes of smoke rising from the planet. I saw fire spreading where homes used to be. Men on the deck cheered. I didn't. All I could think about was Saul, the day the Empire had come for Earth. The terror, the rage, the helplessness. And now we were delivering that same nightmare to someone else's home. I told myself they deserved it, that they were the enemy, that this was war. But deep down my gut twisted. The Empire responded fast. Their defense fleet scrambled from orbit, ships rising from the planet's surface like hornets from a nest, sleek black hulls, weapons glowing with that familiar red menace. The Resolute dove into the fray, cannons blazing. The void erupted into chaos. Streaks of fire and steel carving across the stars. We tore through there. Escorts shredded their destroyers, ripped holes in their formation, but they fought back hard. The Sentinel exploded beside us, her wreckage scattering across the battlefield. The Valor took a direct hit and spun out of control, her crew screaming over the comms before silence claimed them. It wasn't clean, it wasn't quick, it was blood and fire and death, and all the while the planet burned below. Hours bled into days. The battle stretched on, neither side willing to yield. The skies above Vera turned into a graveyard of wreckage, shattered ships drifting in endless silence. On the second day, we breached their orbital defenses. The order came down to finish the job. Hall didn't hesitate. Target their factories, he barked. An NBSP, their production, leave nothing standing. Our cannons thundered again, ripping through the surface. Factories collapsed, cities fell silent, smoke choked the sky, but factories weren't all we hit. The reports started trickling in. Civilian casualties, hospitals destroyed, schools leveled, refugee camps caught in the crossfire. The men ignored it. They told themselves the enemy hid behind civilians, that it was their fault. I told myself that too. But the lie tasted bitter. On the third day, I found Hall in the observation chamber. He stood alone, staring down at the burning planet, the glow of fire painting his face in shades of red. You don't approve, he said without turning. I froze. Sir. He looked at me then, his eyes sharp, his voice like steel. You think I don't see it, the way you flinch when the cannons fire, the way you look away when the cities burn. I didn't answer. You think we're monsters, he said, that we've become the very thing we fight. I clenched my fists. Haven't we? He stepped closer, his gaze boring into mine. War isn't about good and evil. It's about survival. The Empire would burn Earth without hesitation. They would slaughter our families, our children, and they wouldn't lose a night's sleep over it. If we want to survive, we have to be worse than them, more ruthless, more merciless. That's the only language they understand. His words burned because part of me knew he was right, but another part of me, the part that still remembered Earth's blue skies, the laughter of children, the warmth of home, wondered if survival was worth the cost of losing everything. That made us human. By the fourth day, Vera was ash. The factories were gone. The cities lay in ruins. The population, billion strong, was shattered. Some fled, most didn't. We'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. When the smoke cleared, we drifted among the wreckage. In silence, the men were exhausted, their cheers muted, their eyes hollow. Even Hall looked older, lines carved deep into his face. Because we all knew the truth. We hadn't just struck a blow at the Empire, we'd crossed a line. The galaxy reacted fast. Some called us saviors, cheering Earth's strength, begging for our protection. Others called us butchers, condemning the slaughter at Vera as proof that humanity was no different from the Empire. Both sides were right, and the Empire, for the first time, they answered. Their message came through every channel, their language dripping with venom, translated into ours with perfect clarity. You are not hunters, you are not conquerors, you are vermin, and we will exterminate you. The men laughed. When they heard it, they said the Empire Was scared, desperate, but I didn't. Laughed because in their voice I heard something I hadn't heard before, hate. Pure searing hate. And I knew what was coming next would make Vera look like nothing more than the opening move. That night I couldn't sleep. I wandered the ship's dark halls, the metal cold under my hands, the hum of the engines echoing in my ears. I thought about Earth, about the people cheering in the streets, blind to the blood buying there. Pride, about the propaganda screaming of destiny while boys were sent to die in battles they didn't understand. And I thought about Vera, the burning cities, the screams we didn't hear but knew were there, the faces we'd never see, the lives erased in the name of survival. Was Holt right? Was this the only way to win, or had we already lost something far greater than the war? The stars outside the viewport offered no answers, only silence. And in that silence I realized the truth that chilled me to my core. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about what kind of monsters we were willing to become. We thought we had time. After Vera, the fleet limped home, bleeding but unbroken. Command declared it a victory, plastering headlines across every feed. Earth strikes fear into the Empire. Civilians cheered in the streets. Soldiers marched in parades. Families waved flags from balconies as if the galaxy was already ours. But beneath the roar of celebration, whispers spread. The Empire had gone quiet again, too quiet. I'd learned to fear their silence more than their words. Silence meant planning. Silence meant something was coming, and when it came for Earth. The alarm screamed across Fort Armstrong first. I was on the Resolute, anchored in Earth's orbit, running drills with the crew. At first I thought it was another false signal like the early days, but then the sky lit up, slip space ruptured just beyond the moon, tearing open holes. The void, one, two, then dozens, burning gates vomiting fire and steel. The Empire had arrived. Their armada wasn't like anything we'd seen before. This wasn't a scouting party. This wasn't even real. This was everything. Dreadnoughts larger than continents. Carriers that blotted out the stars. Swarms of escorts so thick they looked like storms. Earth's sky turned red as their engines burned through the black. The Empire hadn't come to fight battle, they'd come to end us. Resolute shook as alarms blared. Men scrambled to their stations, voices overlapping in a chaos of orders and screams. Hall stormed onto the deck, his face carved in iron. All ships defensive formation, protect Earth at all costs. The fleet moved like a machine. Destroyers forming walls, carriers rising from orbit, orbital cannons glowing as they powered up. For the first time in history, all of Earth's strength stood together in one place. But as I looked at the wall of enemy ships stretching across the stars, my stomach dropped. We weren't ready. No one could be ready for this. The first salvo came like thunder. Beams of red fire rained down, carving through our fleet, slamming into Earth's surface. Cities exploded in pillars of flame. The ground quacked beneath their fury. I saw New York vanish in a burst of light. London cracked open like a wound. Beijing drowned in fire. Billions died in seconds, and for the first time I felt helpless. All the firepower, all the fleets, all the victories, we couldn't stop it. Earth was burning. The Resolute fired back, her cannons glowing white hot, quantum bursts tearing through enemy ships. Around us, humanity fought like demons. Orbital cannons punched holes through carriers. Destroyers rammed escorts in suicidal fury, fighters swarmed dreadnoughts like hornets stinging giants, and somehow, impossibly we held. The void erupted into chaos. The Empire bled under our guns, ships exploding in brilliant bursts of light. For every city they burned, we answered with a ship torn apart. For every billion they killed, we slaughtered 10,000 of theirs. But the cost was unimaginable. I watched as the Vanguard, our proudest carrier, split in half, her crew screaming into the void. The bulwark exploded beside us, her wreckage slamming into the Resolute's hull. Fires spread across our decks, men burning alive in corridors we couldn't reach. And still we fought because there was no choice. Hours bled into days. Earth's surface glowed with scars visible from orbit, oceans boiling, continents cracked. The death toll was beyond counting, but the Empire wasn't unstoppable. For the first time their armada slowed our weapons. The same dark miracles that had erased their first fleet tore through their ranks. They had learned, but so had we, and desperation gave us strength no empire could match. By the second day, half their fleet burned. By the third, their armada faltered. By the fourth, they began to retreat. Impossible had happened again. Earth still stood barely. When the smoke cleared, the sky above Earth was a graveyard. Shattered ships drifted in silence, human and alien alike, bodies frozen in the void. The Resolute was crippled, her hull torn, her decks stained with blood. Half our crew was gone. I stumbled through the wreckage of the command deck, smoke choking my lungs, ears ringing from explosions. Men lay dead around me, some still strapped to their console, their faces frozen. Defiance. Hall stood in the center, covered in blood and ash, his eyes burning with that same unbreakable fire. They came to end us, he said, voice. And we're still here. That means one thing: this isn't their victory. It's ours. The men who survived roared in approval, but I couldn't, because when I looked down at Earth's scarred surface, the oceans boiling, the continents blackened, the cities gone, I realized something. This wasn't victory, it was survival, bought with blood so thick it drowned the world. And it wasn't over. The days after the battle were worse than the fight itself. Earth was broken, billions dead, cities reduced to rubble, nations gone. The survivors crawled from the ashes, their faces hollow, their voices whispers. But they weren't broken, they were angry. I walked through the ruins of New York days after the smoke cleared. Towers lay shattered, streets buried in ash, the smell of death hanging thick in the air. Survivors dug through rubble with bare hands, pulling out bodies, some alive, most not, and everywhere I looked I saw the same thing in their eyes, not fear. Hate, the kind of hate that doesn't fade, that doesn't forgive, that doesn't stop. The Empire hadn't crushed us. They'd forged us. Holt gathered us on the deck of the Resolute, what was left of it, and delivered the next order. Earth stands. That means the war continues, and this time we don't wait for them to come. We take the fight to their very heart, to their throne, to their capital, and we burn it. The men cheered, their voices raw, their fists slamming against steel. I stayed silent because part of me wanted it too, to see their cities burn the way ours had, to watch their people scream the way ours had. But another part of me, smaller, weaker, wondered if, by the time we reached their throne, there would be anything left of humanity worth saving. That night I stood alone in the observation chamber, staring down at Earth. She was scarred, blackened, bleeding, but she was alive. I thought about the families buried in rubble, the children turned to ash, the oceans boiling under fire. I thought about the men I'd fought beside, the ones who would never fight again, and I thought about what Hall had said. Burn their throne. Maybe he was right. Maybe the only way to survive was to burn them first, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the war wasn't just killing us, it was changing us. Every battle, every order, every death, it was carving something new into us, something darker. And as I stared into the void, I realized the truth that terrified me more than the Empire ever had. If humanity survived this war, we wouldn't be the same. We'd be something else. Something the galaxy would fear even more than the Empire. The order spread across the fleet like fire through dry grass. We weren't just striking another colony, not another supply line, not another factory world. This time the target was the Empire's capital itself, the heart of their throne, the system they had ruled from for millennia. For the first time in the war, we weren't waiting for them to come. We weren't retaliating. We were going straight for their throat. The name of the system hissed across every channel. Horus. It was a word spoken like a curse. The world where emperors had risen, where fleets had launched, where conquest had been written into stone, untouchable, sacred, and Earth had just sworn to burn it. The Resolute was barely holding together, hull scarred, engines patched, her crew half gone, but she was still here, still fighting. And so were we. Men moved through her halls like ghosts, scarred, weary eyes, hollowed by battles that had chewed up entire fleets. But there was something else in their faces now, not just survival, not just duty, hunger for vengeance. When Hall announced the target, I saw it. In their eyes, they didn't flinch. They didn't question. They wanted it. They wanted to make the Empire feel everything Earth had felt. I wanted it too, and that terrified me. The fleet gathered at the edge of Orly's space. Thousands of ships, more than humanity had ever fielded before, carriers, destroyers, orbital cannons mounted on mobile platforms, even repurposed colony ships rigged with weapons. Every ship we had left, every man who could still hold a gun. The void was thick with their presence, engines burning like stars, weapons primed and waiting. On the command deck, the air was heavy. The men were silent, hands trembling over control, sweat shining on their faces. We all knew what this was. Not a battle, not even a war. This was annihilation. Either theirs or ours. We jumped, slipped. Space tore open, swallowing the fleet. Light, the tunnel stretched before us, endless, shimmering with impossible colors. Engines roared, hulls groaned. Men gripped their seats so hard their knuckles turned white. And then, with a lurch that tore through my stomach, we emerged. Eyes spread before us. I'd expected grandeur, towers rising into the sky, shining fleets patrolling orbit, defenses so thick they blotted out the stars. What I saw instead chilled me. The planet was beautiful, too beautiful. Oceans glittering blue, continents covered in emerald forest, cities gleaming with gold and crystal. It didn't look like the seat of a tyrant empire. It looked like paradise. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. And then the sky filled with fire. Their defenses were waiting. Orbital rings bristling with cannons. Fleets larger than anything we'd ever seen rising from the atmosphere. Dreadnoughts so massive they seemed carved from the bones of gods. The Empire had emptied its soul to protect Aurelius. And we had come to kill it. Engage Hall. Roared the void, erupted, the first. Clash shattered the silence, cannons. Roared, beams of light carving through. The dark, human ships dove into the fray, weapons screaming, engines burning. The Empire answered with fury, their dreadnoughts tearing through our ranks, their rings vomiting fire that lit up the sky. The Resolute shook under the onslaught, hull groaning, shields flaring, men thrown across the deck as explosions rattled the ship. But we fired back, cannons glowing white hot. Singularity bursts ripping through. Imperial escorts, sheer fields tearing. Dreadnoughts apart. It wasn't a battle anymore, it was chaos. Ships collided in suicidal rams. Fighters swarmed carriers. Like locusts, explosions ripped across the void in blinding waves. Men screamed, men died, and still the guns roared. Through the viewport I saw Aurelius burning, our weapons slammed into the planet, tearing through golden cities, splitting towers like kindling, cratering forests that had stood for centuries. Fire spread across the continents, oceans boiling under the heat of our fury, and I realized the truth. We weren't liberators, we weren't defenders, we were butchers the same way they had been. Hours blurred into days, neither side yielded. For every Imperial ship we burned, they tore 3 of ours apart. For every city we leveled, they answered with fury that shook the void. The fleet dwindled, both sides bleeding, both sides unwilling to stop. On the third day we breached their orbital ring. The order came down to finish the job. Hall didn't hesitate. Target their throne city, he said, his voice hard as iron. Erase it. No one argued. The cannons roared. The throne city of Aurelius, an empire's crown jewel, monument to millennia of conquest, vanished in fire. Towers collapsed, palaces crumbled, streets melted into rivers of molten stone. Billions screamed as the sky fell. The men cheered. I couldn't. All I saw was Earth. New York, London, Beijing. The same screamed, the same fire, the same ash. And in that moment I realized Holt had been right from the start. To survive, we had become worse than them. By the fourth day, the Empire's fleet faltered, their defenses cracked, their armada scattered. We had done the impossible. We had burned Aurelius. But when the smoke cleared, when the fires dimmed, when the last enemy ship drifted in silence, there was no triumph, no joy, only silence. The men stood at their stations, faces pale, eyes hollow. Holt's jaw was set, his eyes burning, but even he looked older, heavier. We'd won, but at what cost? The galaxy answered before we could. Transmissions flooded every channel, voices from across the stars. Some cheered us as saviors, as heroes who had slain the monster no one else could. Others cursed us as monsters, ourselves no better than the empire we had destroyed. Both were right, and as the fleet limped away from Aurelius, smoke trailing, holes shattered, crews broken, I realized the truth that froze my blood. We hadn't ended the war, we'd become it. That night I found Hall in the observation chamber again. He stood alone, staring out at the stars, his face carved in shadow. It's over, I said. My voice was hollow. He shook his head. No, it's only beginning. I frowned. We burned their throne. We killed their empire. His eyes met mine, sharp as steel. Empires don't die in a day. They die in echoes, and the galaxy has just seen what we are willing to do. That means one thing: what? They'll all come for us. Now he was right. I could already feel The shift. The weight, the fear humanity had survived, humanity had risen, but humanity was no longer just another species in the galaxy. We were something else now, something darker, something unstoppable. And as I stared out into the void, I knew the war wasn't about survival anymore. It was about what kind of rulers we were about to become, and whether the galaxy would ever forgive us for it. The fires of Aurelius hadn't even gone out when the transmissions began. They came from everywhere, systems we'd never heard of, civilizations that had lived in the shadows of the Empire for centuries. Some messages came as praise, others as curses, but all of them carried the same tone: fear, not fear of the Empire anymore, fear of us. We limped away from Aurelius with less than a third of the fleet we'd launched with. The Resolute barely held together, her hull scarred black, her engines whining like dying beasts. Men moved through her halls like ghosts, uniforms tattered, faces gaunt, eyes hollow. We'd fought for days, watched billions die, burned cities until nothing but ash remained. We should have been celebrating, we should have been drunk on victory. But the ship was silent because every man aboard knew the truth. Whatever had been left of our innocence burned with Aurelius. On the command deck, Hall stood over the tactical display, his hands clasped behind his back. His face was stone, unreadable, but his eyes burned with the same fire that had carried him through every battle. The Empire is broken, he said at last. Their fleet scattered, their throne gone. They'll never recover. The men nodded, some even allowed themselves a grim smile, but Hall wasn't finished. That doesn't mean the war is over. It means the war is changing. The galaxy has seen what we can do, and they won't forget. His gaze swept across the deck, settling on me for a heartbeat longer than the others. We've shown them that humanity doesn't kneel. Now we must decide if humanity rules. The decision wasn't ours to make. Galaxy made it for us. Within weeks, alliances began to form, civilizations that had spent centuries cowering under the Empire's boot now turned their fear on us. They spoke of containment, of balance, of the danger humanity posed to the stars. Old enemies became sudden allies, fleets that had once scattered before the Empire's shadow now gathered in tight formations, their weapons trained not on Aurelius but on Earth. The message was clear: we were no longer prey, we were the new threat. On Earth the story was different. The survivors of the orbital strike rebuilt from ash, cities rose from ruins. Stronger, sharper, angrier. The people didn't mourn, they roared. Billboards blazed with slogans: Earth ascendant, humanity supreme, the stars are ours. Children wore uniforms before they could read. Men and women lined up in droves to enlist, hungry to take the war to the next horizon. It wasn't grief anymore. It wasn't fear, it was pride, the kind of pride that blinds a people to what they've lost. I walked through the ruins of what had once been New York, now a scarred skeleton of steel and ash. Survivors moved through the streets with hard faces, rebuilding with their bare hands, eyes burning with the same hate I'd seen in Aurelius. I passed a mural painted on the side of a half-collapsed tower. It showed a soldier in armor, his fist raised high, standing over the wreckage of alien ships. Above him, bold letters read, "We bring fire, children," stood before it, mimicking the pose. Fists raised, eyes shining, and I realized something that chilled me more than any battle ever had. The war wasn't just being fought in space, it was being carved into the very soul of Earth. The Resolute was ordered back into orbit. Weeks later, repaired enough to fight. Again, Hall gathered us in the war room. His face grim. Reports confirm what we feared, he said. The galaxy is uniting. Species that never spoke to each other now stand side by side. They're building fleets larger than anything we've ever seen, and they're coming for us. Room went cold. They see what we did at Aurelius, Hall continued. They see what we're capable of, and they won't stop until they've buried Earth in ash. He paused, letting the weight settle. That means we have two choices. We either kneel or we rule. The men roared in approval. I stayed silent because the choice wasn't a choice at all. Kneeling meant extinction. Ruling meant becoming the very thing we swore to destroy. The days that followed blurred into preparation. Shipyards roared day and night. Fleets swelled. Soldiers trained until their bodies broke. Earth wasn't just defending anymore. Earth was building an empire of its own. But every time I looked into the eyes of the men, I saw it, the change, the fire, the hunger. We weren't fighting to survive anymore. We were fighting to dominate. One night I found Hall alone in the observation chamber. He stared out at the stars, his face lit by their cold glow. They'll come for us soon, he said, without looking at me. I know. They'll unite every species, every fleet. They'll throw everything they have at Earth, and when they do, we'll have to be ready to do what the Empire never could. What's that? He turned, his eyes burning with something that wasn't fire anymore. It was something darker. Win, no matter the cost. His words echoed in my head long after he left. No matter the cost. The cost was already clear. I saw it in the faces of the men. I saw it in the rubble of Earth cities. I saw it in the burning skies of Aurelius, and I knew deep down that Halt was right. The galaxy would come for us, and if we wanted to survive, we would have to burn them first. But survival wasn't the same as victory anymore, and victory wasn't the same as humanity. The final transmission came weeks later. It wasn't from Earth. It wasn't from Aurelius. It wasn't from the Empire. It was from the galaxy itself, a coalition of voices translated into one, broadcast across every channel. Humanity is a plague. Humanity is a threat. Humanity will be erased. The men laughed when they heard it. They said the galaxy was afraid. They were right, but I didn't laugh because fear cuts both ways, and as I stared out at the stars, I realized something that froze my blood. The galaxy would come for us. We would fight, we would burn, we would kill, and even if we won, even if Earth stood above the ashes, even if humanity ruled the stars, what would be left of us? Would we still be men, or would we be something else entirely? Monsters wearing the skin of survivors. The stars outside the viewport didn't answer. They never do. That night I dreamed of Earth, not the Earth of now, scarred and burning, but the Earth of before, blue skies, green fields, laughter in the streets. When I woke, the dream was gone. All that remained was the war, and the war would never end.